When you think of the most important elections in modern American history, a few may come to mind. 1960, 2008, 2016, 2024. I'd actually answer 2000. George W. Bush's victory directly shaped our country and world in massive ways, and it only happened because of 537 votes in Florida. So what if that changed? What if Al Gore won instead? There's a lot of ways to make this happen. In fact, according to some, Gore did win in our timeline. But the most likely ways are a less confusing ballot design in Palm Beach County and letting the recount in Florida that the Supreme Court stopped continue. But it doesn't really matter how it happens. In the end, Florida's called for Al Gore, and he becomes the 43rd president in United States history. Once Gore enters office, he can't really do much in terms of policy since he'd be stuck with a Republican Congress. But him being in office does mean that a lot of Bush's domestic agenda can't get passed, which, yes, means no Child Left Behind, which means much less of a push from the federal government on schools to have standardized testing. The one big domestic push that I can see Gore getting done is expanding internet access across the country. I mean, he did invent the internet after all. But in general, we mainly see a continuation of Clinton-style neoliberalism, although not necessarily as centrist. Okay, let's talk about the big thing.
Do you have any relationship with 9/11?
What's a 9/11? What's that?
There are many factors as to why the US wasn't able to discover the 9/11 plan before it happened. Some of which are due to the election, like it taking longer than usual to start the administration transfer process, but others that were just due to being kind of asleep at the wheel. The big one being the CIA and FBI not really communicating, so one side couldn't take credit for a discovery. So I'm just gonna assume that the attacks happened under Gore too. Initially, the response is pretty much the same. US troops enter Afghanistan and occupy it looking for bin Laden, in the process getting stuck nation building. The biggest initial change would be no Patriot Act getting passed, as Gore was a major critic of it in our timeline. This means much less government surveillance and more rights to immigrants and inmates. I also don't think that the Department of Homeland Security is created, since I think Gore takes much more of a subtle approach to increasing national security. The biggest change to Gore's approach to the response to 9/11 is there's no invasion of Iraq. That was pretty much fully just the Bush administration, and Gore would have no real reason to do it. That leads to a completely different present-day Middle East. Saddam Hussein remains dictator until his death, when either a family member or a general takes power afterwards. In our timeline, much like Afghanistan, the US tried to set up a democracy, and much like in Afghanistan, once we left, it fell apart, leading to the rise of ISIS. No invasion means no ISIS. No ISIS means a far more stable Syria and Iraq, and tens of thousands of deaths are prevented. Now approaching 2004, we're nearing the end of Gore's first term. It's around this time that I'd expect Osama bin Laden to be tracked down and taken out, largely because no invasion of Iraq means the military and intelligence agencies can divert far more attention into the hunt for bin Laden. So once bin Laden gets taken out, there isn't much of a reason for the US to stay in Afghanistan. So I'd expect right before the election, for a political boost, Gore pulls US troops out of Afghanistan, and much like in our timeline, it's taken over by the Taliban. But since less resources were put into it, and we got our guy, I doubt a Taliban takeover would affect Gore's approval too much. Speaking of the election, I'd expect Republicans to nominate someone who's more moderate and with war experience, since we're in a war. The perfect choice is the person who came second place in 2000, John McCain. For his Veep, I went with Tom Ridge, who would be a moderate like McCain, and was the former governor of Pennsylvania, so you've got some swing state bonus. Between Gore's massive approval rise after 9/11 and its resurgence after bin Laden gets caught and us leaving Afghanistan, I don't see Gore having very much trouble at all getting reelected. Sure, there would be some signs of party fatigue, but not enough to get him out of office or even make the election really close. I expect Gore flips Nevada, Missouri, Ohio, New Hampshire, and his home state of Tennessee from his performance in 2000. This puts him at a strong 338 electoral votes to McCain's 200. Due to Gore's popularity, Democrats also probably gained seats in Congress in 2002 and 2004. In the House, I think Democrats flip the chamber in 2002 and hold it in 2004. In the Senate, I think they net 3 seats in 2002 and another 3 in 2004, leading to a 56-44 Senate, setting Gore up for a second term to actually focus on domestic policy.
Everyone will say, "Thank you, Al Gore. You're super awesome." The end.
I think Gore's top priority for his second term would be climate change. Some people might argue that the one thing that who the fuck is Gush? What, bro? Some people might argue that the one thing that Bush's win had an even bigger butterfly impact on than Iraq is climate change. The early 2000s was when climate change really started to become more apparent to the general population, and Bush being in office led to climate change becoming more of a political debate than a fact, and the US not really taking the steps to push for global climate restrictions. With Gore in charge, that flips on its head. The US uses its influence and negotiations with most nations globally to set climate standards. Now, if countries like China would actually follow that is a different story, but at least it would be a standard for most countries. For the US itself, most likely we'd see some carbon restrictions to get carbon neutral within a few decades, and some minor restrictions on some other stuff. As for other policies he wanted, there'd be some tax cuts to the middle class and campaign finance reform. But some of the bigger stuff he wanted, like universal pre-care and expanding Medicaid, would probably be shot down by a Republican filibuster. And yes, that includes the
lockbox.
It took Democrats getting 60 Senate seats in 2006 to expand Medicare in our timeline, so I can't really see it happening here. As for the national debt, Gore wanted to continue the Clinton surplus, and with the war in Iraq not happening, I think it would make it easier to save some money, but the war in Afghanistan would still probably keep us from a surplus, at least until we leave. But aside from that, no big spending rise wouldn't really start the trend of spending that we saw continue all the way from Bush to Trump, meaning that maybe, just maybe, we're actually debt-free by the present day. So by 2000, Gore's term is coming to a close, and it looks like everything is going well and actually gonna be okay until...
Company immediately... Good time for my voice to go. Fired 3,200 workers. The manufacturing index also fell in the month of March.
Since I watched The Big Short, I'm an expert in the economy, and everything I say is factual. And I'm fairly sure the recession would have happened with or without Bush. The reckless and stupid loan practices that were going on by the banks weren't really being influenced by the president. So I'm just gonna assume they happen even if Gore's president. And since they happened so late in his term, there isn't really much he can do before we have an election. For the Democrats, I think they nominate Hillary Clinton. With an incumbent president probably endorsing her, I don't really see how Obama can get a leg up. And he managed to win because people felt like they needed hope for the Democrats after 8 years of Bush. And that wouldn't be a thing here. So I think he just waits for later. For a VP, I went with John Edwards, as he would be from a competitive state in North Carolina, and I don't think he would have had the scandal against him without him previously being a big national figure. For the Republicans, I went with Mitt Romney, since he came second in our actual 2008, and would be a fairly decent choice to unite the party. For his VP, I was pretty close between Mike Huckabee and Rob Portman, but I went with Huckabee because he's more charismatic and could help balance out the ticket with Romney. Because of the recession and party fatigue from 4 straight Democratic terms, I think Romney wins fairly easily, winning the popular vote and flipping 10 states from 2004, getting 321 electoral votes to Clinton's 217, making Mitt Romney the 44th president of the US. From here, we're going to be speeding up a lot since we've left Gore's actual term, and the further we get from the point of departure, the harder it is to predict. Through President Romney's term, the economy does improve, but slower than in our own timeline, because Romney's less inclined to use the government to help out people than Obama was. Because of the slow recovery, Romney is pretty underwater in terms of popularity because people wanted results faster, much like how Obama was in our own timeline. Speaking of Obama, he's who I think Democrats pick in 2012, since he's a young rising star and offers change from the party's previously pretty moderate platform, and since Hillary already lost, he doesn't have much competition. For his VP, I went with Evan Bayh as a pretty inoffensive pick to boost him in the Rust Belt. I think because of Romney's unpopularity and Obama being a fresh, generational candidate, he beats Romney pretty narrowly, flipping back 9 states from 2008 and getting 290 electoral votes. Obama's first term goes pretty well, and the recession is brought to a close. He goes up against Jeb Bush and Nikki Haley in 2016 and wins re-election fairly easily. He handles COVID a bit better than our own timeline since he takes it as more of a threat earlier, causing the recession we actually got to instead be more of a minor crash. Then in 2020, Democrats nominate Amy Klobuchar and Cory Booker, and the Republicans go with Marco Rubio and Brian Kemp, who barely win, getting 272 electoral votes. Finally, since the original COVID crash wasn't as bad, inflation is less of an issue in the US, and they win re-election against a Newsom-Whitmer ticket in 2024, getting 324 electoral votes. In terms of how this would affect the Supreme Court, Gore would appoint 1 judge, Romney would appoint 2, Obama would appoint 2, and Rubio would appoint 1, meaning that, funny enough, the court would still be 6 conservatives to 3 liberals. So overall, in this timeline, the United States is less deeply affected by 9/11. Since unlike in our timeline, here we left the Middle East in 2004, meaning our identity as a nation in the early 2000s is completely changed. The Middle East is also far more stable, while climate change is addressed far earlier. Politically, since there's no unpopular Bush administration, ideologies like neoconservatism and neoliberalism have not become obsolete and still dominate the two major parties. We also have a less polarized environment where Democrats still do well in places like Ohio and Missouri, while Republicans still do well in places like Virginia and Colorado. Is this a timeline you'd rather live in? And what other scenarios should I cover in the future? Please let me know in the comments section below. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, subscribing would help the channel a lot, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
创世纪第39章，约瑟被带下埃及去。有一个埃及人是法老的内臣护卫长波提乏，从那些带下他来的以实玛利人手下买了他去。约瑟住在他主人埃及人的家中，耶和华与他同在，他就